Well, here we are, finally at the end of 2023. You can say a lot about this year, but one fact that's difficult to dispute is that it's been a stellar 365 days for video games. Regardless of your preferred genre, you've likely found at least a few titles to get lost in. There has truly been a flood of content, way too much to complete before the end of the year. I'm sure I won't be the only one hopelessly chipping away at the backlog well into 2024, which is shaping up to be an exciting year in its own right. Before we break out the new calendar, I wanted to reflect and take a look back at the year that was.
Alright, I'm ready to get wowed by this dessert.
Just give me 1 second.
A couple of quick notes before we begin in earnest. These are not the top 10 games of 2023, these are my top 10 games. All titles discussed are my personal favorites. This list is in no way intended to represent a definitive ranking of this year's best. Secondly, and just as importantly, a game does not have to have been released in 2023 to qualify. As long as I played and completed it for the first time in the 2023 calendar year, it's eligible for the list. Okay, with those qualifications out of the way, it's officially time to count down my top 10 games of 2023. Somehow, I've yet to cover a first-person shooter on the channel, but rest assured that I'm a huge fan of the genre. My FPS standout of 2023 is none other than Metro Exodus. The third game in the Metro series, based on the novels of the same name, follows franchise protagonist Artyom as he attempts to survive the brutalities of a post-nuclear Russia. This time around, the ragtag band of survivors ventures outside the labyrinthine confines of the subway system in search of a better life above ground. This shift not only provides an interesting narrative opportunity, but a gameplay revolution as well. While previous Metro entries were strictly linear, Exodus dips its toes into open world territory, with multiple hub areas that can be explored with far greater freedom. This expanded scope is a mixed bag at times, but overall, I think it's a positive change, and if you're concerned that the game ditches its roots, you'll be pleased to know that Exodus still retains the confined, linear set pieces that the series is known for. It's not without plentiful presentational issues, but thanks to a brutally immersive world and tight gunplay, Metro Exodus asserts itself as a thrilling experience that's worth the radiation exposure. Kena Bridge of Spirits feels like a throwback. It may not look like one, with its absolutely gorgeous world always front and center, but its gameplay loop harkens back to experiences of yesteryear. It's best described as a take on classic 3D Zelda with a bit more combat and a little less puzzle solving. Ocarina of Time is in contention for my favorite game, so it's really no surprise that Kena clicked with me so quickly. It's genuinely compelling to explore the forests and farmlands, and the combat remains engaging throughout the entire experience. A forgettable narrative and some extremely frustrating difficulty spikes hold this game back from ranking higher on the list, but if you're looking for some wholesome poignancy in the midst of this medium's ubiquitous violence, Kena Bridge of Spirits has you covered. This is the first game from developer Ember Lab, so I cannot wait to see what they cook up next. I'm a sucker for games with a retro art style. Don't get me wrong, I love pushing polygons as much as the next guy, but there's something about exploring a world that looks out of a bygone era that I find oddly compelling. One Shot scratches this itch perfectly, but that's only the beginning of my praise. Tasked with bringing light to a collapsing world, you'll need to employ some puzzle-solving skills to progress through the game's various levels. Puzzles usually aren't my thing, but progression here mostly involves finding items through exploration and then bringing them where they need to go. That may sound a little basic, but there are also some fourth wall breaking brain teasers that are unlike anything I've played in recent memory. It's just a really clever experience. I was constantly engaged while playing, drawn in by its melancholy world and sharply written dialogue. If you enjoy games with a slower pace, I'd recommend giving One Shot a go. There's no combat system here, but it's a dense, quirky ride that'll likely leave you wanting more. The Yakuza series is remarkable. Since 2005, it's chronicled the conflict-ridden life of series protagonist Kazuma Kiryu, largely flying under the radar of many North American players, to the point that for a few years, the series stopped getting localized. Today, us Americans have caught on to the brilliance of the franchise, which is now more popular than ever. Yakuza Like a Dragon is the eighth mainline entry in the series, and first to feature new protagonist, Ichiban Kasuga. It also marks the series' transition to a turn-based RPG, away from the brawler gameplay of prior entries. In a nutshell, it features a lot of change, but as someone who's played every other Yakuza game, trust me when I say that Like a Dragon still delivers exactly what you'd hope for. Once again, a gripping narrative pulls you forward for the entirety of its 40-plus hour experience, and I found the change in genre to be a much-needed breath of fresh air. As is always the case in virtually any Yakuza game, Like a Dragon features some serious pacing issues, and I imagine some will bounce off the shift to RPG, but that doesn't change the fact that this is one of the best games I've played all year. I'm sure I'll talk about this franchise more in the future, but while we're discussing it now, allow me to reiterate the quality of the Yakuza series. I really think this is one of the most underrated franchises of the entire medium, with a completely engrossing, multi-game storyline. This 8th game is still building off the original narrative from the first. If indulging your inner Yakuza sounds compelling, this is the best, and likely safest, way to do it. Supergiant Games is one of those developers with an absolutely unmistakable style. It doesn't matter which of their games you're looking at, you can just tell it's a Supergiant joint. Hades is no exception, but it also pushes the studio's boundaries. For the first time, the team has cooked up a roguelite, which certainly caught my attention, as I'm a big fan of the genre. Unsurprisingly, Supergiant delivers big time with one of the best roguelites I've ever played. At the core of any game in the genre is combat, and in that department, Hades is second to none. It's satisfying, visceral, and as you'd expect, extremely challenging. So much so that many players will likely be discouraged in the early goings, but it pays to push onward. The game features a myriad of passive upgrades that can be unlocked as you complete runs, making the game significantly more manageable and addictive, enabling your base skill level to increase as you continue to play. It's a finely tuned gameplay loop that makes it almost impossible to pull yourself away from the controller. Supergiant has done it again, and considering the fact that they're currently hard at work on Hades 2, I think they'd agree. "2023 was finally the year that I made the jump to the next, or I guess more aptly now current, generation. I have a massive backlog of games, and I wanted to finish all of the lingering titles before jumping over to the future of gaming. Back in February, I finally began exploring the PS5, and there was one game I knew would be my first. Astro's Playroom is actually a free pack-in with the PlayStation 5, so if you own that system, you own this game. With a price tag of technically $0, it would have been easy for Astro developer Team Asobi to phone it in, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This is a 3D platformer absolutely bursting at the seams with creativity and love. It's a classic launch game of sorts, utilizing the PS5's DualSense controller to its fullest potential, and it even features a bevy of iconic PlayStation characters and products that can be discovered throughout the levels. It's a massively enjoyable 3 to 4 hour adventure, but I think my favorite part about the game, and this may sound a little strange, is how much I was thinking about other games while I was playing it. This essentially acted as a starting line for me, and I found myself imagining all the different experiences yet to be had on my brand new system as I jumped and rolled my way to victory. So far, this generation has entirely lived up to my hopes, and it all started with Astro's Playroom. I underestimated Death's Door. I'm not sure why, maybe it was the isometric perspective or the presence of crows, I'm not sure what it was, but for some reason, I just wasn't that excited to experience what it had to offer. I wanted to play it, obviously, I bought it, but it had a lot to prove. I'm happy to report that my skepticism was entirely unfounded. In a slightly reductive nutshell, Death's Door feels a bit like Dark Souls hybridized with The Legend of Zelda. Its character progression and pace of combat are reminiscent of the former, while the structure harkens back to the latter. The game doesn't attempt much in the way of innovation, but it doesn't need to, as everything present is executed so skillfully. I think this is actually a really great entry point for someone interested in the Souls-like genre that feels intimidated by its difficulty. Death's Door is markedly easier than its From companions in virtually every way. There's no one component of this game that necessarily stands out, but it's greater than the sum of its parts. Death's Door is just a really fun video game, and the fourth best one I played in 2023. I knew very little about Omori before playing it. I knew it was a top-down RPG in the stylistic vein of something like Earthbound, but other than that, I was flying blind. In hindsight, I'm really glad I kept myself in the dark because Omori is one of the most surprising, compelling games I've played in a really long time. The concept is simple. You play as the title character, who's sent on a bizarre journey with his closest companions when one of their other friends goes missing. That's where any sense of normalcy draws to a close. If you're fond of the peculiar writing and characters of games like Undertale, you'll feel right at home with Omori. The inhabitants and scenarios of this world are some of the most unique I've seen, but what makes this game even more compelling is its juxtapositional nature. Yes, Omori may look cute at first glance, but dig a little deeper and you'll find that it's very much a horror game. I invoke no hyperbole when I say that Omori contains some of the darkest content I've ever experienced in a video game. More than almost anything else I played this year, Omori will stick with me for a very long time to come. What more can I say about Stray? I've already dedicated an entire video to gushing over its merits, but what's a little more praise on this feline masterpiece? Stray is one of those games that completely engrosses you. Give it 20 minutes and I can pretty much guarantee you won't want to stop. An incredible world, rock-solid pacing, a stunning presentation, the list of everything that Stray gets right is a long one. I typically play games in a relatively short session, say 60 to 90 minutes before bed, but this game was one from which I just couldn't pull away. It's a stunning debut from Blue 12 Studio, and whether it moves on to create a sequel or another original IP, it's poised to become one of the standout developers in the industry today. Simply put, Stray is an amazing video game, and would have been my game of the year, if not for one other experience. I knew for a long time that the last game I wanted to experience on the PlayStation 4 would be The Last of Us Part 2. As my PS4 backlog began drawing to a close in late 2022, I began wondering if this game had any chance of living up to my expectations. After all, it had drawn a ton of controversy since its release, but I'd managed to avoid most spoilers, and I trusted Naughty Dog, arguably my favorite developer. I finally completed The Last of Us Part 2 way back in January, and I'd say my trust was well-founded. I'm actually a bit hesitant to dig too deeply into my thoughts about this game, as I will absolutely be covering the series in dedicated videos down the line, but I'll say here that The Last of Us Part 2 fires on all cylinders. Narratively, mechanically, presentationally, in all disciplines, the game is a masterclass. This is Naughty Dog operating at such a high level, it's difficult for other studios to compete. My playthrough ended up lasting about 60 hours. The pace at which I play a game tells the full story of how much I'm enjoying it. With some games, my patience runs thin and I begin skipping enemy encounters or forgoing exploration. Even dozens of hours in, I still didn't want The Last of Us Part 2 to end. With its PS5 remaster releasing next month, there's never been a more opportune time to play this absolute masterpiece and my favorite game of 2023.
Can we get your girlfriend to the stables, please?
It's undeniable how wonderful of a year 2023 was for video games, and yet, looking back, I'm left with a sense of melancholy. Despite massive commercial success for many of the year's releases, thousands of game developers were laid off this year, often due to financial mismanagement committed by people who never have to face the individuals they're affecting. This industry is no stranger to issues like crunch and general mismanagement of its workers, so to see so many lose their very jobs through no faults of their own is deeply saddening. I don't pretend to know how to run a successful development studio, but it's clear that the video game industry needs to do better. In 2024, I hope to see fantastical new worlds, exciting new ideas. I hope to see some really incredible video games. But more importantly, I hope to see fair and humane treatment of the people who make them.